Hello, this is the Dreadweaver. Prepare yourself for a night of true horror stories that will weave webs of terror in the darkest corners of your mind. If you're a fan of stories of mystery, true crime, paranormal, or anything that crawls in the shadows just beyond our sight, you've found the right place. We are now well into the most frightening month of the year, and to celebrate, we'll be focusing on tales of restless spirits. Tonight, we have 4 lengthy and unique stories of listeners' encounters with entities from the other side. We'll end the night by recounting the tales of the most haunted small town in America. If you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. And with that, let us delve into the darkness. Story 1: The Family Ghost by FearlessKingTay. I grew up in a very old house in the Midwest that my parents got for a steal. It was originally built as a hotel, and the seller was very motivated to get rid of it. Growing up, weird little things happened all the time. The typical malarkey that is easy to ignore for years and years. Footsteps, strange shadows, the feeling of being watched or followed, swearing you see someone in the room right as you wake up. The room in the basement that chills your blood every time for no reason. The occasional hard-to-explain moments. I moved to the West Coast in my 20s for school and self-discovery. During a visit from my family, my sister told me that they had met a ghost in the house. I was pretty skeptical, but my entire family backed her up. She was in her room, and her radio had been acting up. So just on the off chance, she said, "Okay, if you're a ghost, could you just please stop it?" The radio turned off. She waited a moment and then said, "Wait, if you're a ghost, turn it on." And the radio turned on. After some experimentation, they devised a system of communication. Volume up was yes, volume down was no. The digital readout on the volume was 0 to 30, so 1 was A, 2 was B, 3 was C, and so on. If the radio turned off, then it was a sort of hard no or off-limits question. Through this system, the ghost had explained that he wanted to be called Jason. He had died in the house in 1905 at age 5 when he was sick, and he lived in the house alongside us with his kind mother and evil father. When they asked if he loved his father, the volume went to 0 and the radio turned off. In fact, he refused most questions about his father. Apparently, he was the cause of the more malevolent experiences that people had in the house. I was definitely intrigued and went back home that year to visit for a chance to experience this for myself. However, when I arrived, Jason refused to interact with me. I would leave the table and the radio would pop back on. My sisters would call me back and the radio would turn off instantly. He didn't want to have anything to do with me. As I thought about this, I remembered an experience I had before moving to the West Coast. I had been lying in bed one night when I felt a hand ruffle my hair playfully. I freaked out. I shot out of bed, turned on the light, puffed out my chest, and overconfidently yelled, "You don't know who I am or what I'm capable of. If you try that again, you'll regret it. Don't you dare mess with me." And then several picture frames on my desk flew off onto the floor belligerently. I stayed at a friend's house that night. One night on my trip, after Jason refused to talk to me, I spoke out loud. "Hey, I'm sorry if it was you who I yelled at that one night. I bet you were trying to play or introduce yourself to me, and I got scared. I didn't need to be so mean to you, and I understand if you don't want to talk to me." The radio turned on. "Hey, are you the Jason I've heard so much about?" The volume went up. "Did I yell at you that night before I left?" The volume went up again, and then went back down to a reasonable level. "I'm sorry about that. Can we be friends?" The volume went up again. It was incredible. He had introduced himself to several family friends as well. To prove he wasn't some sort of hacked radio, he would do additional tasks. He would ring our doorbell. He would push crayons around on the table. He even did a really incredible trick for us. While asking about the logistics of being a ghost, he had turned the volume up to a question that he could travel anywhere almost instantly. To test it, we called up a family friend on the West Coast. This friend put out a newspaper on their kitchen table. Jason then visited them and came back to set the volume to the date of the paper. The radio turned off for a moment. Then, seconds later, it set the volume to 17. The friend said, "So close, the paper was for the 18th. But Jason was not convinced. Volume up, volume down, 17. Volume up, volume down, 17. 17, 17, 17. The friend checked again and apologized. "Oh, he's right. I misremembered. It's the paper from the 17th. He refused to answer any questions about God or religion. He gave us a few answers that contradicted as well. He told us he didn't need to sleep, but he had told my sister a few months earlier that he did. One thing he seemed to know was how long he would be here. Through the volume system, he told my sister he would be around until her 28th birthday, then his family would move on to the next phase. At the time, this was a couple years into the future. Sure enough, we never heard from him after that. During his time with us, he would occasionally visit our dreams. We would have these extremely realistic dreams where a boy in a white hooded robe would say hi to us, ask us to play hide and seek, or ask us questions about ourselves. Then he would confirm with my sister that he had visited us. He used the radio primarily, but in the final year he got better at manipulating other electronics. He could make printers print messages. He could manipulate televisions. He even sent us texts in the last few months. My mother had texted me, "I see you, haha," when I was back in the West Coast a couple years after all of this. I texted her back, "Did you come out here to visit? Where are you?" But she was so confused. She said she was in the Midwest at home, and her phone had no evidence of sending a text with that message to me. I texted back, "I think Jason sent me a message. Hi, Jason." And I got a reply, "Hi." Again, not from my mom. My sister even once got a call with a picture of Obama and the caller ID saying Mr. President. But there was nobody there when she answered, and apparently no callback number. The radio confirmed with a volume up that Jason was goofing around. It was a wild few years with that crazy kid haunting our devices. My family still has that radio out just in case, but it hasn't turned on in years. My sister is now well into her 30s. I know this will be met with a lot of skepticism. Even I was very skeptical until I was able to meet him myself. However, I think it's finally time to share this and to answer questions people might have about it. Some frequently asked questions. Does my family still live in the house? Yes, they do. My mom and sister are around. There has been no communication or experiences from Jason or the father since my sister turned 28. You realize Jason may be a demon or lying spirit sent to trick you, right? Maybe. We haven't ruled that out yet, but it felt pretty chill. I get that that could be part of it. How did his parents die? It's unclear to us, too. I wish we had found more information on them. Why didn't you record it? Oh, we tried. Electronic recording was interfered with or glitched every single time. Jason didn't want to be recorded. Camcorders glitched. Phone video didn't save or seemed to be immediately deleted. Even audio recordings didn't work around the radio when he was active. Story 2. The Closed Door. I have a lot of ghost stories from the home of my youth. My parents and I had many strange experiences throughout our time there, but one encounter stands out from the rest. Most of our experiences were unsettling, but didn't seem threatening. At the end of our time in that house, things escalated very quickly. It was a weekend in late February in the early 2000s, around 9 at night. I was 15 at that time, and lost in my own world of typical teenage girl things. I had my favorite CD in the stereo, singing along while I painted my nails. I was carefully trying to brush my favorite shade of pink along my pinky finger, the trickiest one, when my door suddenly burst open with a large roar. I screamed, swiping nail polish all over my finger, and kicked over the jar of polish onto the magazine I was planning to read as my nails dried. I turned around to see my little brother, who was supposed to have been sleeping, bent over in hysterical laughter. I jumped up and chased him down the hallway toward his room, yelling threats as I ran. About halfway down the hall, my mom stopped me, redirected me back toward my room, and went to handle my brother. Peeking out from behind his doorway, I watched him stick his tongue out at me. I rolled my eyes and walked back to my room. I cleaned up the mess he had caused, settled my nerves, and finally began to paint my second hand. I kept my door cracked open this time, hoping to hear his footsteps in case he tried something like that again. When I finished my nails, I began looking through my new magazine, slowly getting back to the relaxation my brother had so rudely disturbed. All seemed quiet, and I started to relax. It seemed like he had finally gone to sleep. I flipped another page and checked my nails. Not quite dry enough yet. Back to reading. Suddenly, my door slammed shut. I jumped straight to my feet, immediately filled with rage. He was going to get it this time. I ran to the door and tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. My door had no handle at this time, so there was no reason it shouldn't open easily. I slammed my fists on the door and yelled curses at my brother on the other side. That's when it occurred to me that if my brother were standing there holding the door shut, he would have to have his fingers through the hole for the doorknob. There was nothing there. I peered out into the hallway. Absolutely nothing. No one was there. Annoyed, I continued trying to pry the door open. It wasn't tight in its frame, so it shouldn't be stuck. But no matter how I tried, it would not open. I banged on the door again, yelling out for someone to help me get my door open. No answer. "Hello? Can someone let me out of here already? He did it again!" I said, still convinced my brother had somehow done this. Again, no answer. I was only steps from my parents' door, but no matter how much I yelled or banged on the door, it seemed like no one could hear me. The rage started to turn to fear when my bedroom light went out. I could still see the hallway light on through the hole in the door. What was going on? My brother was a prankster, but he wasn't old enough to pull something like this. Just then, I heard something in the corner of my room. A creak, like someone stepping on the old floorboards. Then another. I quietly tried to squeeze myself into the dark corner against the door, frantically searching for what had made that sound. Another creak. That's when something crept into the sliver of light coming through the hole in my door. The shadow of a man slowly appeared before me, standing stock still with a wild grin on his face. My heart leapt into my throat, and I screamed in sheer terror. I began banging on the door with all my might, screaming that there was someone in my room and begging for someone to let me out. All the while, this man continued toward me. After a moment, my parents came running down the hall and burst through my door as if it had never been stuck at all. I collapsed into my mother's arms, barely able to explain what happened through sobs. When I was finally able to catch my breath, I saw that the lights were back on. According to my parents, they had been on when they came into the room. My dad checked my door, but found no way it could have stuck. He checked the circuit breaker and the light switch, but everything was functioning as usual. No windows were open, and there were no drafts to have slammed the door shut in the first place. My brother was still in his room, having slept soundly through the whole thing. We were only in that house for another month, but I never slept in that room again. Story 3. My first taste of courage and the birth of fear thereafter. Submitted by an anonymous listener. This story takes place before the 2000s. I know that for a fact because we moved and celebrated the turn of the millennia in a new home. I always use this to remember things from that far back. I'm 31 years old today, so this was around 1998, 1999, putting me between the ages of 5 or 6. One night, I woke up in my brother's room, where I would sometimes nap. I found myself with him and his friend, and they were playing a video game. I really wanted some chocolate milk, so I asked if he could get me some. I wasn't exactly afraid of the dark at the time. I was just really accustomed to my parents doing everything for me. He laughed at me and said I'm old enough to do that stuff on my own now. I waited for a few minutes, gathering courage as I looked through his door into the hallway that led to the living room. It was dark. I didn't know how to turn any of the lights on, so I was preparing a plan of how to get from the living room to the kitchen. It's basically a simple turn of direction when you make it to the living room, and you can then proceed straight to the kitchen after a brief corridor where my parents' room, a door to the basement, bathroom, and closet is. So after summoning the courage to make this possible, I walk out of the bedroom and I make it to the last of the light's reach in the living room. From the living room, I looked into the kitchen. The corridor had enough visibility that I could walk through it, so I proceeded onward to get my chocolate milk. Within the corridor, there is a small hallway which has a door to my parents' room, a bathroom, and a closet. The bathroom is in between my parents' room and the closet. The closet is closest to the living room, where I just came from, and my parents' room is closest to the kitchen. In the opposite direction of these rooms is the door to the basement. When I made it to the corridor, right at my basement door, something caught my attention to my left, which is where the bathroom and closet are. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a small girl comes out of the closet. She had a dress on, like something you would see from the 1940s. She had hair that was curly and short. She was entirely powdery white and left a trail of fog as she moved. It was like looking at someone from a black and white film in reality, almost gray-like. She was also carrying a doll. Perfect clarity. I watched her as she moved from the closet to where I was standing, and then she dropped her doll right in front of me and stood there. I didn't understand what I was looking at the time. I wasn't even afraid. My first reflex was to do what my mother told me, and that if a girl dropped something, pick it up for her. So I said out loud, "You dropped something." And then I reached down and tried to pick it up for her, but she beat me to it. She then went back into the closet. I watched her as she returned. It was like looking at something that was recorded and played from a projector or a hologram. From how she got her doll to her movement, it looked like a projector playing a recording of a person. It was how fast she got the doll that makes me say this. It was like I didn't exist to her at all. I just happened to be standing in the right place. Still not understanding what happened, I went and got some milk. I was completely unfazed by what had just happened. I told my brother when I got back, and he said, "That must be the girl Dad said he heard crying in the attic when we first moved here. You were still a baby at the time. Good thing you didn't follow her. The attic entrance is right above where this happened at." He then said, "I've never seen her, but every now and then my closet comes open." He pointed at his closet and then went back to gaming. His friend stopped caring too and went back to playing. I made an intention to tell my parents first thing in the morning. When I did, all I got out of them was the same story my brother told me about the crying in the attic. It was the first time I had heard these stories. It seemed like they didn't care. It was strange seeing something like that as a child, and adults just didn't care about it. After this happened, I started treating dark areas differently, and ultimately became afraid of the dark after. Story 4. My Visit to a Weird Vanishing House by TheThingInTheWoods. I'm not really sure how else to succinctly describe this experience, or if this is even the right place for it. I've been sitting on it since the summer of 2012, only having mentioned it to a few people. I guess I'm writing this partly to finally put it out there, and to also see if anyone else has had similar experiences or an explanation of what might have happened. To start, here's some context. In 2012, I was living in a coastal area of the northeastern U.S., working for an agency that mostly monitored and enforced environmental compliance. I'd prefer to keep the state and agency secret since I'm not sure the legality of talking about this. However, They issued building permits for structures and work being done alongside protected wetland habitat. Usually these were things like piers, docks, bulkheads, etc. What my job entailed was visiting these properties with a copy of the blueprint included with the permit application, then taking measurements, and sometimes photos, and comparing them to the blueprint to ensure that the applicant did only the work they said they were going to do, and nothing more. On this particular day, I had a few sites to visit, and one of them was to check on a dock that was supposedly being built in a backyard, extending through a salt marsh and into the bay. This all took place in a fairly well-to-do area with a lot of old money and a lot of houses that would nauseate me to find out how much they were worth. If you're picturing a neighborhood of very spaced out, very large houses with immaculate landscaping and waterfront views, you have the right idea. What set this house apart from all the others, even as I parked on the street, was how utterly wrong this place looked for where it was located. It was situated at the inside corner of two streets, with another house on either side of it, and it looked utterly incomparable to its neighbors, which were both very large, very new-looking houses, as I previously described. This one was a derelict-looking two-story building that looked like it was awaiting foreclosure. It had rotted wooden siding, a roof that was falling apart, and a lawn that looked like it hadn't been mowed all summer. In fact, the only thing that didn't look ancient and unkempt was the white picket fence, which was pristine, as though it had been painted earlier that week. I double and triple checked the address in the blueprint, finding that while I had the right address, the house looked nothing like how it did in the blueprint, appearing to be a different shape. After confirming that the adjacent houses were also the right addresses, I approached the front door, only to find the storm door wide open and the screen door closed but torn in several places. Now, while my job did not require me to make site visits while the owner was there, or even inform them that I was arriving, I still always tried the front door first, so that the owners didn't think I was just some stranger skulking around their yard. I knocked and rang the doorbell a few times, confused by the fact that nobody was answering, since someone surely had to be home if the door was hanging open. After waiting a bit, I decided that the people living there might have been in their backyard, and that I would let them know I was there when I went around back. The only problem was that there was no way to go around back. The immaculate white fence, which was probably a good 6 foot tall at the shortest, did not appear to have any gate, connecting seamlessly to the fences belonging to the two neighbors. While this struck me as odd, it was nothing I hadn't run into before. Some people didn't have gates and would begrudgingly let me in through their front door to access their yard. But still not expecting anyone to answer, I tried my hardest to see if I could peer through the slats of the fence. It wasn't the same as measuring it, but at least this way I could check and see if the dock had been built, and quickly check if there were any other new structures back there that weren't supposed to be there. After fruitlessly trying to get a good view, I resigned myself to trying to pull myself up and peer over the top of the fence. What I found there was a blank, perfectly square yard, completely level, with grass so green and low-trimmed that it looked like it belonged on a golf course. It didn't seem to make sense, being that well manicured, since I already proved there was no way for someone to get a lawnmower around back. And if the owners were willing to put that much effort into the back lawn and the fence, why was everything else so unkempt? Weirder still, the lawn was otherwise featureless. No furniture, no trees or flower beds, just a solid, blank square of grass, without even a sunspot or wild clover to be seen. It was what an AI might think a lawn looked like. Looking for the dock, though, I found that the fence even stretched across the back of the property, again with no gate. Now, this made even less sense to me. Why would anyone build a dock that they couldn't access? Why would anyone meet the markup for waterfront property only to block off their view of and access to the water? Utterly confused, I was getting ready to just call this one a failed assignment and head back to my office. But as I was heading back to my car, I looked again at the front door. Someone had to be home, right? Maybe there was some weird, esoteric way to access the dock through the fence, and maybe putting the face of a person to all this would make the experience seem less weird to me. I made for the windows. They were filthy and had ratty pink curtains drawn, but I tried my best to subtly peek through a gap and see if I could find signs of people inside. The living room of the house looked even worse than the exterior. Eggshell paint was spotted with mildew and peeling off the walls. The thin green carpet had been torn in several places, leaving it intact in some places and laying in crumpled heaps elsewhere. Light fixtures were broken or hanging limply from the ceiling, and I could not see a single piece of furniture. It was the exact opposite of what I was hoping to see in there, and with some dread, I accepted that I would try the door one more time before calling it quits. With the storm door open, I called out into the house, asking if anyone was home. No answer. I explained further who I was and what I was there to do. No answer. With my face so close to the door, I was beginning to catch whiffs of the air inside. It was sour and briny, stinking of stale seawater and the decaying detritus of low tide on a hot day. It smelled like the house had at one point been filled with seawater, then allowed to sit stagnant in there for ages. Years later, I still don't know what got into me to take a step into that house. I think I was growing concerned for the owner. What if the place had been ransacked and someone was hurt inside? What if someone couldn't get to the door or call out because they were incapacitated? Whatever the reason, I opened the screen door and took a step inside. Just one step. Enough to peek my head through the door. What immediately hit me was the intensity of the smell from before. So suffocating I almost choked on it. I quickly began to worry that someone might be dead inside, and I called out again, asking if anyone was home and if they were okay. Now, to cut away for a moment to give a bit more context. I am no stranger to supernatural experiences, even less so now than I was back then. Between seeing deceased relatives as a kid and the occasional glimpse of a stranger at a historical site, or flickering in and out of my vision, apparitions were still occasionally startling, but seldom worrying. Usually these manifest for me as seeing the vague image of a person for a short blink of time, as though watching a video and the person is only present for 1 or 2 frames, just long enough to barely register what you saw. More often, it manifests for me as a feeling, a subtle change in air pressure or an electrical quality to the air. Imagine the feeling you get when someone is right behind you. You cannot see or hear them, but their presence is somehow felt. It's like that, but in greater magnitude and more focused, usually still subtle enough to ignore it if you weren't paying attention. That was not what I felt in that house. As soon as I called out, that feeling of presence was incomparably loud and impossible not to notice, like a person bellowing for me to leave. I actually fell to my knee in surprise, my pants getting dirtied by some liquid the carpet seemed saturated with. The smell, the loudness of that presence, I felt like my breath was being pulled out of me. Then I heard a banging from somewhere above the ceiling. I thought it was footsteps at first, coming from the 2nd floor. They sounded like someone was stomping aggressively as they paced around in a circle. Or rather, the rhythm sounded wrong for footsteps and too loud. It sounded like someone was slamming something heavy repeatedly down onto the floor. I was already back at my car by the time I realized I had bolted. I've had many more paranormal experiences since then, but to this day, I have never experienced that kind of deep, instinctual animal panic from them. Now, if you've been paying attention and can break this story down to its basic components, you might be wondering what I did later when I went home. Could this have just been a weird house with a squatter inside? You had a panic attack and imagined some things? Well, for months afterward, that was how I justified it to myself. Attempts to contact the owner back at the office told me that the phone number was not in service. While my boss was initially disappointed that I didn't complete the site visit, he also understood that sometimes you just can't get access and have to try again some other time. For a while after that, the weird house fell to the back of my mind. In the fall, Hurricane Sandy hit, and that meant my plate was full with all the permits sent in to repair storm damage. It was spring by the time I finally found the permit to that particular house again, dreading that I would have to go back. This time, I brought my work camera just in case, hoping to at least document my visit, even if I didn't get access. But the thing is, when I drove back to the address for the second time, the house was not there. To be clear, I don't mean it had been replaced with a new house. Nor do I mean that the house had been demolished, leaving an unoccupied lot at the corner of those two streets where it once stood. I mean, it was as though the house had never been there. The two adjacent houses, now seemingly much closer to each other, each occupying perpendicular sides of the corner. As with the first time, I compared what I saw to the blueprints, and indeed, the two houses were the addresses of the houses on either side of my assignment. But the house I went there to see just wasn't there, and appeared as though it never had been. Only that blueprint confirmed to me that there had been a house there. I took pictures of the unoccupied corner, returned to my boss with a shrug and the evidence of the house's non-existence, and the matter was eventually dropped while I moved on to other assignment. Story 5. The most haunted small town in America. Around the world, there are many places that are known for a large number of hauntings. The number of such places in the U.S. alone is staggering. But which, if any, of these places stand out from the rest? In 2021, the Shadowlands Haunted Places Index may have given us our answer. That year, Mackinac Island was voted the most haunted place in America, with a staggering 9 times more haunted locations than any other town of its size. So what is it that makes Mackinac Island such a spooky place? A large part of the creepy atmosphere is the amount of human history the island holds. Mackinac Island was first inhabited by indigenous tribes who called it the Place of the Great Turtle and considered it a very sacred place. European settlers first arrived in the late 1600s with the establishment of a Catholic mission. The French recognized that the Straits of Mackinac made the area a great location for trade and built Fort Michilimackinac in what is now Mackinac City in the early 1700s. Michilimackinac is the French interpretation of the indigenous name for the island, and where the name Mackinac would later be derived from. After the French and Indian War in the late 1700s, the British took control of Fort Michilimackinac, re-establishing it as Fort Mackinac on the island instead of the mainland. After the War of 1812 and a valiant effort by the British during the Battle of Mackinac to maintain control of the fort, control fell to the Americans and became part of the U.S. territory. The fur trade established by the settlers over 100 years before allowed the island community to flourish. By the early 20th century, tourism had taken over as the primary driver of economic growth and remains that way to this day. With such an intense history, there are bound to be some lingering spirits. Fort Mackinac holds a large amount of the island's history, and as such is said to be one of the most haunted spots on the island. Visitors to the fort's jailhouse often report feeling cold spots that appear suddenly, and orbs both seen in person and captured on film. When visiting the fort's hospital, tourists report experiencing strange sensations of sadness and feeling unwell, unpleasant smells, and the weeping of children. The officers' quarters are known for toys and furniture that seem to move about on their own overnight, despite being put back in place at each day's closing. It is not uncommon for guests to report seeing uniformed men that either disappear or cannot be seen by others around them. The island is also home to Fort Holmes. Built by the British after taking the island from the French, it was originally named Fort George in honor of the king. Fort George was renamed Fort Holmes when Americans took over the island after the War of 1812. The name was chosen to honor Major Andrew Holmes, who lost his life in the Battle of Mackinac. Soldiers are commonly seen here, walking among the tourists as if they are still alive, only to disappear suddenly right in front of visitors. Many guests report seeing a group of 3 soldiers entrenched in hushed conversation that disappear quickly upon being sighted. One of Mackinac Island's most famous haunts is the Grand Hotel. Built in the late 1800s, Local lore states that builders unearthed a large number of human remains during the hotel's construction, sparking rumors that the area may have been a sacred indigenous burial site. Several mysterious deaths have occurred over the hotel's years of operation, including those of a hotel manager in the 1920s and a Detroit labor boss in 1955. Hotel guests report many specters wandering the hallways, some even known to cozy up in the hotel beds. A seldom-seen shadow entity once sent a maintenance worker to the hospital while making repairs in the theater, and the maintenance worker refused to set foot in the hotel ever again. The most common apparitions include that of a woman in Victorian clothing, sometimes seen with a dog, wandering the hotel premises, and an older gentleman in a top hat playing the hotel's piano while smoking a guitar. Many tourists visit the hotel specifically for its notable paranormal activity. The Mission Point Resort is home to many spirits of its own, largely attributed to its tragic history. The site was home to the Mackinac Mission School, or St. Anne's School, from 1825 to 1837. The school was a boarding school for indigenous children, designed to strip them of their families, cultural identities, and so-called heathen ways, and convert them into what was considered upstanding and refined Christian citizens. The founders and operators believed they were saving the souls of these children. Such reprehensible boarding schools were prevalent all across North America at that time and continued operating through the 1960s. Children who were forced into these schools were subjected to unspeakable brutality, neglect, and other torturous treatment, and a countless number of them did not make it out alive. The souls of many of these poor children are said to remain, roaming the area as a stark reminder of the atrocities that occurred there. Mission Point's resident ghost, affectionately named Harvey, is rumored to be a student of the former Mackinac College, who took his own life after being rejected by a romantic interest. In contrast to his tragic backstory, Harvey is said to be a fun-natured spirit who enjoys playing tricks on resort guests. He is known to play flirty tricks on female guests, such as pinching and poking, and is also known for moving furniture, jumping on guests' beds, and even crawling in bed beside them. Both Mission Point Resort and the former Mission School building are still standing on the site. There is one ghost on the island that has been spotted at multiple locations and doesn't seem to be tied to any specific place. She is a young girl with curly hair wearing a sundress that has been spotted peering out from behind objects and structures or from cabin windows, only to disappear when someone tries to investigate. Dubbed Lucy by locals, there is no historical record to prove exactly who she might have been, but it is believed that she is a young girl who fell ill and died sometime in the late 1800s. She has been heard many times faintly calling out for her parents. There are many more ghost stories that surround Mackinac Island, too many to gather in one place. Visitors report new and unique encounters constantly, and a wide variety of accounts are available to read all over the internet. Perhaps the island's spirits are better experienced in person. Haunts of Mackinac provides visitors the opportunity to visit the island's most infamous sites and experience the tales for themselves. The walking tour takes guests on a 1-mile journey throughout different haunted locations on the island and details the legends of many of the sites listed in this story. Tours run through the end of October. A link to learn more can be found in the video's description. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back next week with more tales whispered only in the shadows. If you would like to submit a terrifying tale of your own, head to our subreddit r/thedreadweaver or send us an email at thedreadweaver@outlook.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. Until our paths cross again in the shadows, stay vigilant and beware the whispers of the night. This is the Dreadweaver, signing off.